folks. Welcome to Project Gamma. At Project Gamma, we have smart conversations with smart people across technology, entrepreneurship, and cybersecurity. My name is Warner Moore. I'm a technologist and a cybersecurity leader who helped build multiple business-to-business software as a service companies who's passionate about building modern cybersecurity programs. I'm also the founder of Gamma Force. At Gamma Force, we help tech and health tech companies with cybersecurity strategy by acting as their fractional security organization. Excited to have a conversation today with Robb Winkle. Robb has a deep career as a technologist that focused on front-end technologies earlier in his career. After spending some time in enterprise, Robb transitioned to working as a consultant. During his time as a consultant, he realized that AI could help make business technology integrations easier and co-founded Doohickey AI as their chief technology officer. Welcome, Robb.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, my pleasure. Well, the neat thing about your background is that you went from a job to starting a services business to a product startup. Any single one of those things is a big change. What was that like? How did you start thinking about your career differently?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started doing enterprise consulting in the MarTech space, doing Adobe Experience Manager, Adobe Marketing Technology, and I actually got the opportunity to separate and do my own thing independently with L Brands because I had known somebody that worked there. So I realized that there was an opportunity, no conflicts with my existing company, which allowed me to separate. And I will say that when you're working for somebody versus working for yourself, a lot of other options open up. You can think about, how you do things differently or what you can do. So that was a key thing, which allowed me to actually join with my co-founder Ryan at Blended Edge to be able to go do something else, which I was more risky, which I may not have done in the past. So it was definitely me separating from working for somebody else allowed me to go out and do some other things and some interesting things. So when we started Blended Edge, uh, we started as a consulting company with the same thesis we've always had around integration, which is some products just they don't exist without integration, and you have to be integrated into other problems and into other products. And we wanted to help people, be able to build those integrations easily and scale them out. So we started as a consulting service, setting up open source integration platforms for our customers that they would host. So there was always a setup, there was projects to like do specific integrations for them. There was ongoing work of building integrations on that platform. And then if they had a software product themselves, which all of our customers did then, they would embed that into their product so that their users could self-service and sign up for integrations. So our work was all project based of like adding these integrations to the integration platform. And so we got to a point where the customers didn't necessarily want to manage that integration platform. So our first pivot was actually to add additional managed services offering to our customers. So we were doing consulting as well as managed services, making sure that that integration platform was up. If something came up, they could reach out to us. And we were doing that for a while. We started seeing the same problems. Customers would reach out to us, and if there was an issue that came up, and we could get in and solve the issue for their particular instance of the open source integration platform. And so that we were doing that for a while. And as we did more and more of these with customers, we realized a lot of them had to do the same things to embed this integration platform into their product. And so that's really where the original idea of our Doohickey Cloud product came from. So Blended Edge was the company. Originally, Doohickey was actually our product name, which I'll get to in a minute how that shifted. But uh, it really, the initial vision of the product was to help these customers not have to implement this every time on top of an integration platform, and they can just directly embed it into their product. So that was the next phase is us like building this out. We, had our initial customers and started to grow that out. And, some of the customers that we worked with were still with that services consulting. Some of them came, some of them went. But we still were doing some services consulting, some managed services, as well as a product. So we had all three. Um, and so that was working well. We got to a point where it was, pretty steady. It supported us, and uh, there was a point in time where, we really wanted to do something different or focus on growth. And we saw AI as a way to do that. And we started doing some experiments. So first thing was trying to understand issues that could be going on in the integrations themselves from a business user's standpoint. That was our initial proof of concept for using AI in the product. And so a business user could ask, like, why didn't this order number get to the warehouse? And it could tell you exactly like, oh, there's a 400. And then the user could say, I don't know what a 400 is. And it's, oh, well, this data was missing. This is how you could solve it. And it could give you more contextual information at the level of the user who is asking the question. So I think that was like a new, not really talked about thing at the time. It's pretty common knowledge now, but at the time it was like meeting somebody where they are. This is a technology that can meet you where you are, depending on what type of person or background that you have, what you understand to help you learn and do that. So that was the initial POC that we did. We also did a proof of concept of using that to build out integrations on the open source platform. That didn't get as far along, but it was still in the proof of concept phase. So we could interact with both of these through Slack. And those really were the proof points that helped us get into Techstars. So I would say Techstars really marked the next phase of the business. So we had done these proof of concepts and gotten to the first Techstars Columbus class. And we were able to, uh, go through that program. Coming out of it, we actually rebranded as the product. So the product is not necessarily what it was then. We've done a lot to change what it was pre-AI. But because Blended Edge sounds a lot like a consulting company, and Doohickey sounds a lot more like a startup, that was part of the branding and thinking behind it. But so that really was one of our big turning points in the company coming out of Techstars. We rebranded, we rethought about how we do the product. We were gearing it more towards conversational, so conversational AI, and trying to drive how you build out an integration based on conversations. And Claude artifacts is an example of like the approach that we were taking. But we definitely learned that is not a good user experience to like have this long conversation around integration because it's just like time consuming. There's not as much context as you would like. So we broke things out into smaller pieces. And while this is all happening, we also set up a very customer focused process. So we actually started this meeting called Doohickey Recess. So once a week on Fridays, the whole team would get together and talk about what we learned about the customer. So we had signed each developer to a different customer that they would, report back on and say what they have learned, that week. And then, okay, what can we put on the roadmap that would address that concern or problem? And sometimes, that would we would talk a lot about just big ideas as well as like, what would it look like to solve that problem, in an ideal world? And then, okay, what can we actually do now? And that was great. That was like making everyone very customer focused. Everyone understood the problem, had direct access to like what the customers were saying. And we were able to like iterate very quickly and understand, okay, does this work? And that actually evolved into the process that we have for building AI products, which allows us to get fast feedback. With vibe coding, you can get a lot faster feedback without actually developing anything. That was definitely a key piece. I know there's a lot of people doing that now, but like if you could, I designed a game in a meeting. I was just like, we were just having fun in our recess meeting, and it's like, okay, what if we made a game that taught you how to debug integration issues? And so while we're talking, I'm sitting there typing in Claude and having it develop an artifact for that game. And we actually released it. I forget what the subdomain is, but it is still out there, where it has like 4 levels or something of you debugging an
Yeah, I like
integration.
the customer focus. A couple things you've said I want to like focus on briefly. You talked about the transition from being comfortable having a job to being comfortable consulting or getting your own source of revenue or income, and then getting multiple streams of revenue in a business as well as iterating on product market fit. Like those two things are like both really big milestones or different ways of thinking of things. And I think it really cool how that helped you become more comfortable with that journey. Because at least for a lot of folks, the idea of losing or not having a paycheck just show up in a bank account every couple weeks is a pretty uncomfortable thing for someone. So it's a really um, interesting thing to share. So thank you for that.
I,
You were
I will
talking.
I will tell you to that point, like when you work with enterprises, there's always the delay from the invoice that if you've done it, there's net 30 is best case, but net 90, you invoice and then 90 days later you get paid. And if you're leaving a W-2, you have to have savings to essentially prime that pump of receiving income that you have to make sure you haven't like a month to 3 months worth of income before money will start coming in again to be able to do that.
Yeah, accounts receivable can be a bear.
Mhm.
As an entrepreneur, I often say I'm not a bank, and I'm not. At Doohickey AI, you started talking more about that transition to product, like really going all in on product. And I know you had 4 pivots in a relatively short period of time. How did you know it was the right move to pivot?
Uh, I think it was different each time. Uh, a lot of times it was based on what the customer wanted. I think it's different when you're a services company as well, because when you're a services company, what the types of projects that you do don't have to be consistent. Like it doesn't have to be the same type of thing. Whereas if it's a product, you kind of have to narrow in on like what this thing is going to do so that you can, position and that repeatability. And also, if you are venture funded, it has to be something that can can scale. It can't be like you're doing this thing for one customer and you're doing this thing for another customer. You truly need to find that product market fit that you can grow on. So I would say like the early days, just doing the straight consulting, all of it was project based. Um, we went to managed services so that we can have something more recurring and not have to like go project to project and always finding that project. So it gives you a base level that you can work with without having to worry about where the next customer is going to come from. So like that was one transition and learning. It was naturally beneficial for us. Like our customers need help managing this infrastructure. Okay, let's do that because that would be recurring revenue that we could start to build on. And then the same uh, could be said when we built the first version of our product. It was getting to some of that recurring revenue based on the product, and figuring out the pricing levers for that. But it's all getting more into repeatability because when you start with services, you have to go out and continually feed the pipeline and schedule out the work. And I think most consulting companies find that recurring revenue, there's lots of different ways to do it. Um, but a lot of it's driven off of like what the customer is asking for. And so pivoting from services into a product, uh, it's it's a different way of getting customer feedback. So there's obviously the customers that you're interacting with, but there's like the whole world of potential customers out there that you just want to talk to and understand their problems and try to narrow in. So there's that customer development piece of just talking to a lot of people who could potentially be customers and narrowing down who that's going to be. I think that's something that's different. You definitely have the positioning for both. Like we are this type of consulting company or this type of service, and we are this type of product. Um, but I feel like there's a lot more of the just interviewing and iterating to get to something that you can package up.
I'd argue that just as much of what you described for product, where it has to be a fit. I'd argue that's just as true for services. Now, admittedly, a lot of services businesses don't operate that way, but just think, it's like the team members in the company and the processes and capabilities built in the company, they can't do everything. And if you try and serve all these different markets and solve all these different problems, it's usually not going to work out very well.
You have
The
to niche down before you expand out to different lines.
Yeah, I was reading a book and I've been thinking a lot about that, particularly product market fit versus niching and services versus product. And where my thoughts are right now is that they're essentially the same thing. It's just talking about them differently. Um, I think that because product tends to be a little more tangible, that we don't blur it as much, like the point you made earlier. One thing I'd like to highlight in what you just talked about too is I really liked how you were talking about working with customers and proving out value. And you were referring to it as services, but I'll tell you what, some of the best startups I've seen who are quite big now were iterating like that. But once they proved out their thesis, they built the product and scaled the business around it. And that's a much better approach than simply building product, right? And then throwing it away later.
Yeah, there's no this or that either. I mean, there's the term now is forward deployed engineer. Uh, with AI, product is also services and services is product. Like there is no this or that. It's this and that. What people they may call it something different, but that's usually the case.
in a health tech company, I helped scale to a unicorn. I actively helped negotiate some of the industries we're selling in, where they were trying to paper they'd give the contracts they'd give us would be a more professional services contracts, and I'd have to negotiate them, and I'd be like, guys, we're building a product, we're not engaging this way, and they got it, but well, actually, they didn't get it. But what they did get was the value that they were buying from us. They wanted that. And they wanted it enough that we were able to navigate around the box they were trying to put us in. And frankly, it would have been way easier to just accept it. And they would have given us a lot of money to just accept it, but it would have kept us from being a unicorn. And
Mhm.
I I, I wouldn't draw hard lines around that. And honestly, at the time, I probably would have, and I'm much more nuanced about it now because I do think there are tech-enabled services businesses that are more tech companies than services business that can scale really well, and the services make a lot of sense for those business models. So generalizing is a disservice, but I do think that thinking tech first is a better way to think of it if we want to build a tech company.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, you had some business traction at Doohickey, and then you decided to seek outside capital. What drove you to that decision? And why not bootstrap?
Yeah, absolutely. So where we were as a business, we were stuck in this place where we had enough revenue to support ourselves, but we were spending too much time in the business to be able to grow it. So it's like we weren't able to grow it to hire more people to get out of the business, and we didn't have the current revenue to do it. So we were just like stuck in this in between place where we were just helping our customers and doing the projects, and we weren't able to get tell them no because we needed that revenue. And so that's why we decided, this isn't somewhere where we want to be. We actually want to do something that will grow. Otherwise, it's not really worth our time to try to just get stuck in this. And we're also at risk because if one of our customers were to say, no, we don't want to work with you anymore, then we have to replace that revenue while still trying to work in the business. So it's not a good place to be stuck.
I do think there are different challenges at all stages. In the moment, that there are always the worst challenges, right? And then there's another one. That's something I often remind myself of as a founder whenever I'm working through a problem, and there'll be a different problem in the future. It's what we signed up for.
Exactly. And I think a lot of it's about, what you want to get out of the business as a founder. Like uh, Ryan and I were fine bootstrapping, but we weren't fine being stuck, like we had a lot of sales leads coming in, a lot of them weren't closing. There was also a lot of this was around 2023 as well, when all funding dried up for our customers. So there was a timing aspect to it as well, is, our customers weren't spending money. So then we, find ways to continue with the existing business until, those come back around. And so there were these inflection points where Ryan and I would just have to get together and brainstorm, like, okay, how do we bring in revenue? And then we would go out and see which one will work. Um, so that that is part of why it's, that timing, we were just, stuck in that cycle, and um, figuring out if that is the right customer that we want, if there's a different customer. So we did like go through that that process as well.
Switching topics a little bit, you shared with me recently that language is the best abstraction. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so this was something I came about from lots of pain and suffering because when you deal with integrations, nobody likes integrations. They want them to just work. And so when we were building out the product, you have an integration platform. You are integrating with other systems. You're building flows. And so, we were using Open API docs, and that is a huge spec, and it's made for everybody. And most people don't use the whole spec, but if you support Open API docs, you have to support everything. And then they came out with it used to be called Open API workflows, but now it's Arazzo. Uh, it's a way to build based on a business case. If you have to make multiple calls to an API endpoint, it defines how you make those calls to accomplish a business task. And so we were using all of these as an abstraction on top of integrations, and having the LLM generate an Arazzo document. But the Arazzo document was also dependent on having an open API doc defined. And I just found myself one day like thinking, I was trying to debug the Arazzo document, and I was like, this is complicated. Like, I don't remember. I have to go look all this stuff up to figure out like the spec and what it should look like and how we configured the underlying abstraction and code to use this. And uh, I was just like, this is too much. And so I was like, what if we just got rid of all that? Because, you know, at the top language is like your requirements for what this integration is supposed to do. And at the bottom is actually the code that runs it. So all that stuff in the middle, can you just get rid of it? At the same time, so this was like May, and coding assistants were good enough to just, you could tell them to go build something and they would go build it. And they could generate, good tests, and uh, it's it keeps getting better. But I was like, can we just take the business requirements and then generate an integration workflow? Because honestly, all those abstractions in between, they were just adding complexity. They were supposed to make things simple, but they actually box you in as well. So like your abstractions become the way that you think about building integrations when that may not actually be the best way. But if you cut out all the middle and you're just generating code, so I have language and I generate code, you get rid of all that and it's working. And so let's say you have to update it. Well, now you can use language to update it. You can use uh, monitoring software that uses language. So you make sure that you're emitting, from this flow, what's happening. And if you think about it like site reliability, and you have, objectives and measures for how this should operate, and if it's under those metrics, and then you have to fix it, and you're able to generate the integrations, then you can feed that right back in to generating the integrations to fix it, to validate it. And you also have, uh, if it's a workflow and you have input outputs for steps, you could actually replay those steps to make sure that that integration works before you deploy it. So there's like this self-sustaining cycle that you can get to if you actually remove all of the in-between abstractions and go straight from language, business requirements, into like the primitive that you're actually trying to do. And I think AI allowed us to do that. I don't know if that's the right solution for everybody, but that's how I came to this, like, yeah, language. That's the ultimate abstraction. That's what we use, between each other to describe the problem, describe what we're trying to do. And if you can just translate that directly into code, you don't need those abstractions now.
Yeah, I like that thought a lot. It's something I've been thinking a lot about and talking a lot about is my take is Gen AI is a paradigm shift, but we are still solving the old paradigm. And an example of that is we're using computers to talk to computers using the language that we created for humans to talk to computers. So acknowledging your context is slightly different, but I think it illustrates part of the challenge where we're using new tech to solve the old paradigm. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for us right now as we're going along this journey to step back, think about what the actual value creation is. And all this meta stuff we're doing along the way that made sense with the old paradigm might not be what we need to get to the value creation any longer. And I think we'll need to be farther along that journey to really coalesce those thoughts into something meaningful. But I think all of us, as we're working on these problems and in these problem spaces, if we sit back for a moment and think about that, it's at least worth asking the question.
Yeah, I've definitely been like immersing myself in the different ways that you can use AI today and understanding like what patterns are out there. We had talked about, I had the different patterns that I'm seeing in agentic coding, uh, which I saw from a book from the 40s that actually had the same the same way of solving a problem that you use with agentic coding. And there's all these standard ways that are still being used. You need to understand the problem. You need to come up with a plan for how you solve it. You need to implement the plan and then look back and understand like, okay, what could I improve or what did I learn? Uh, and I think understanding what is the higher level primitive from, the first principles helps us like go forward. You're not worried about like, oh, do I create a bunch of markdown documents or blah blah blah. It's like, no, if you understand the higher level concept of what you need to do to solve that problem, you can start to fill in the details underneath that.
What's the name of the book?
It's how to solve it.
How to Solve It. The And I like some thoughts that you shared with me before when we were talking, where you were talking about agentic coding and provide the humans, us, setting the context for what the definition of success looks like. Um, Setting the meta context, I think, is very important.
Yeah, correct. And that so that is it, I think we went through a phase with the company where I was trying to encourage the developers to use more AI. And then I think they over-indexed and we started getting slop in the code base. And then everybody came back and was like actually looking deeper at what they generated and not just pushing things forward. Uh, so everyone, I think everyone is going to go through this like, oh, we have this great tool. And then you start generating a bunch of slop and then you have to kind of pull back. And the right solution is that you should always have the human in the loop to help define these. So like driving what it is you're talking about and trying to understand whether it's like finding the file and in the existing code base and the line number that applies to the problem that you're trying to do, or having it have it do some web research to pull that in, and then coming up with, a document or something that represents that whole thing and reviewing it, and then going to the next step. And this ties back to the how to solve it, which is like define a plan for how you are going to solve this problem. And you feed in the research and, have talk, walk through it to come up with that plan and make sure that you review that entire plan. Like you need to make sure that everything that's in there is correct. And then that feeds into like actually creating tasks for the implementation phase. Uh, I I've actually had coding agents go off for like 4 hours because I went through this process and had it define out all the tasks, and it was based on what I knew I wanted to build, and I had reviewed every single task, and then I just like let it go. And then where I've evolved to is after it's implemented, okay, how can I add additional layers, validators to give immediate feedback to the agent, like give it a browser so that it can test the front end, have it look at server logs, give it linear MCP to plan or beads, which is another planning tool. But like, how can you reduce what you're copy pasting in? So those are like individual things in that process where the human is in the loop, know when to automate, know when to like check that everything is correct. And then, that's always going to be the case. Otherwise, you're just going to get AI slop. So no more slop.
Love it, Rob. Building actual things, not just talking about it.
Exactly.
So bittersweet. You're at the end of your journey and shutting down Doohickey AI. Why? What are the big lessons you learned on this journey?
Yeah, I think bittersweet is the right way to put it. Because Ryan and I, we put a lot into the business, and we've been through four different pivots, and we've been working on the business. And we did get to a point where it's like we either want to grow this or let's do something else. Um, and so that's where we were as a business. And I think for the problem that we were trying to solve, and I talked about it a little bit earlier, that self-sustaining loop of generating integrations and monitoring them. Like I think someone is going to do that vision. Uh, it's not going to be us. If we had the funding to do it, I would absolutely go forward. But I I don't I don't think we raised enough upfront for the full vision for what it takes to like have that type of integration product in market. So I learned a ton from the business, and that doohickey recess I think is invaluable. Like the stuff that we did and the culture that we built are all things that I'm going to take away from it. But the word bittersweet is relevant because I'm sad that we are folding it down, but I'm also hopeful to go on and do something else, and use all the things that I've learned, uh, hopefully for, something that is extremely relevant today and I can learn, work on a good problem with good people.
Thanks for being here, Rob. I'm excited to see what you build next. Do you have any closing thoughts or books or anything you'd like to share with our audience today?
Yeah, I would say that the book How to Solve It, it's super interesting. It is old. It's interesting how it ties back into um, like just the way that you solve. It's about math, but it doesn't apply to just math. Um, I would also say that um, anyone feel free to reach out to me because I'm super into evals and how you build a reliable product. So that's something I'm always happy. We never touched on that, but that is something I'm super passionate about, building AI products. This is part of my learning from our process as well. Um, so yeah,
How should folks reach out to you?
feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Robb Winkle, Rob with two B's. Is the username, same on Twitter as well, or
Cool.
X.
Cool. Thank you for listening to Project Gamma, presented by GammaForce.io. If you've enjoyed this podcast, check us out on your favorite podcast platform to catch future episodes.